Hansama, Karzi, Trimby, Targamas. All these names have one thing in common. EMEA Masters champions into LEC champions. Rookies and veterans, big names and newcomers have all been fighting it out in this tournament for 9 years. 9 years of legends rising, fired up national pride and nations uniting so the EMEA region can discover their best talent in League of Legends yet. The EMEA Masters tournament has been absolutely pivotal for the EMEA League of Legends ecosystem, with thousands of players participating all across the EROs, into hundreds funneling right here, fighting for the title. This is the place where top league teams find their new MVPs, their rising stars that will take EMEA by storm. But wait, there's more. 2 new regions have just joined EMEA Masters, MENA and the TCL. MENA had a fantastic debut, storming through the play-ins and almost making it through to quarters on their first EMEA Masters appearance ever. And then comes the big boss. The Turkish teams that have qualified to Worlds and MSI for years, that have faced the best of the best of the best on the biggest stage in the world, are now here with all of their experience to challenge everyone else. History is being made every single split on this stage. It went from Challenger Series to EU Masters and now EMEA Masters. But one thing has remained the same. Your EMEA Masters champions today can be your LEC champions tomorrow. Who will rise?
Tuve una caída en mi carrera, pero he vuelto más fuerte que nunca.
Pero ojo con Supa, va a reventar a Marlon. Se atreve ahora con el 1 contra 1 contra FLICKR. No debería de ganar el tetón.
J'ai progressé une étape à la fois jusqu'à arriver au sommet.
Maintenant qui est dans la mêlée. Et la côte de Roguette, elle est magnifique du côté de LDLC.
Ich weiß, ich kann der Beste sein, jetzt muss ich es nur allen zeigen.
Für ihn wird sogar noch mehr ein Triple für ihn. Der Quadra-Kill für Kinui.
선택할 수 있는 길이 많았습니다. 저는 지금 걷고 있는 길이 옳다고 확신합니다.
No arpsze tutaj na gotowe, nie odbierajmy. Pentakill jak najbardziej zasłużony.
Orada sıfır bir değişim. Ayakta kalan son isim Elramir.
Uzun zamandır bekliyordum, şimdi benim zamanım.
Hello and welcome to EMEA Masters, the first iteration after the rebrand, with new regional leagues joining us to show off which region is the one to beat. Starting with 28 teams, and now we're down to only 8. Which team will rise? I'm Ginny, your host for today, and joined by JB and Jemana, both of you. Lovely to have you both on the floor.
The analyst.
The analyst
Welcome
floor.
to the studio, and welcome to you as well.
Thank you.
For the first time here, this is going to be an amazing day.
Yeah, and I apologize in advance that they put you on the show with us at the same time.
It was a calculated mistake, yeah.
Good luck.
Yeah, that's all we really can say about that.
I mean, good luck to each and every one of the teams as well. But if you're wondering how we got here, as I said, only 8 teams left, but we started off with a total of 28. Maybe you've missed the play-ins and the group stage action, but don't you worry, because all of us forget to do our homework sometimes. So we got you. You can copy it from us, and we're going to be starting off with how exactly we got here.
Yeah, so 4 groups, A, B, C, D, as you like it. I think the biggest surprise really for me was specifically the B group as well, which the Italian seed with Moshko being the one going 5-1. Not only is it the second time that Italy is actually getting out of groups, but it's the first time they get out of groups as that first seed as well. So phenomenal showing by them, but also just from the other groups, pretty much everything, I would actually say, went to how you'd imagine it a bit.
Yeah, I think a couple of the pathways maybe a little bit off-kilter in terms of like the individual game performances, but outside of that, yeah, I think Group B is just realistically the biggest surprise. I have to bandwagon with you here. I feel like Matchco going first, Movistar, you know, kind of clinging in to get to second place. Just the collapse, I feel like a lot of people, if you're watching the LFL playoffs, you kind of saw maybe that something like this could occur, but I feel like FUT as well, not quite making it into the top two, pretty big surprise.
Yeah, I mean, also the first seeds are now all from different regions, which is the first time since 2020, which, you know, if you do your maths, that's been quite a while. But looking at the game that we're going to be broadcasting here on the main broadcast today, it's going to be LDLC up against DenizBank Istanbul Wildcats. Now, that's going to be a banger because it's another best of 5. Every single one of these games to the quarterfinals are going to be best of 5, and there is also going to be a B stream.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be really interesting just because every matchup is very much something you actually want to pay attention to. I think Matchco versus SK Prime can be really close. Matchco coming in as first seed. SK Prime barely making it with that 3-3 scoreline as well. Of course, a day-to-day with Wildcats and LDLC going up against each other. I've heard people say that this might as well just be the finals already with the kind of caliber that these two teams are bringing.
Yeah, you know, I'm also going to quickly pitch the fact that Go and Unicorns are on the same side of the bracket, on the opposite side of the tree too, because I feel like Unicorns have really shown us a very incredibly high ceiling. I think the way that they dispatched LDLC in their group to secure the first seed as well was something to behold. But yeah, I feel like seeing the Wildcats plus LDLC be here in the quarterfinals is definitely a huge matchup to be seeing now.
Yeah, and if you don't want to miss any action from the Matchco up against SK Prime game, make sure you head into the B stream, Lulu Esports, check it out. But we have, as we said it, Istanbul Wildcats. Now, if you're wondering what this roster is all about, or you haven't really heard of them much, which would be interesting because maybe that means you're coming from under a rock, that's fine. We have a video to show you where the TCL powerhouse is coming from.
DenizBank İstanbul Wildcats aslında Türkiye'nin en eski e-spor takımlarından bir tanesi. 2006 yılında kuruldu. 2012'de League of Legends'a geçiş yaptı ama biz onları o yüzden farklı bir isimle tanıyorduk. HBA Gaming.
2012 yılında ilk resmi turnuvayı kazandı. Fakat bu turnuva aynı zamanda bir lanetin başlangıcıydı. Uzun süre kupa kazanamadılar ve en sonunda küme düştü.
Çilekler 2017 yaz mevsiminde Şampiyon Ligi'ndeki yerini alıp HVA Gaming'e yükselme ligine düşürüyor.
2019'da biraz işlerin değişmeye başladığını gördük. Bir rebranding sürecine girdiler ve şu anki adını DenizBank İstanbul Wildcats adını o zaman aldılar. 2019'dan sonra çok daha fazla toplulukla birleşik, inanılmaz derecede rekabetçi bir takım izlemeye başladık. Son 5 mevsimin 4'ünde şampiyon onlar oldu. Şu anda Şampiyonluk Ligi'nde bir takımın şampiyon olabilmesi için Wildcats'i nasıl devireceğini çözebilmesi gerekiyor. Ama bunu başarabilen çok az takım ortaya çıktı.
2023 kış mevsimi şampiyonu DenizBank İstanbul Wildcats.
Bu mevsimi kazanmak benim için iyiydi aslında. Beklediğimden de kolaydı. Çünkü final 3-0 yendik. Mutlu edici bir final oldu.
Temp'in kullanabileceği bir ulti şarjı daha var. Onu defansı kullanmak durumunda kalıyor ve Fatih Can burada düşecek Mao tarafından alınan skor. Ve DenizBank Wildcats çok ama çok önemli bir takım savaşı ile beraber oyunu bitirmeye gidiyor Elramir'in 4'te 4'üyle.
Ya inanılmaz derecede yorulduğum anlar olmadı. Ya aslında bayağı rahat bir sezondu yani benim için. Öyle ne stres vardı ne inanılmaz bir yorgunluk. Öyle yani sonra şampiyon olup kazandık yani.
Bu sene Wildcats'e geldiğimizde üstümde baskı hissediyordum. Çünkü Wildcats geçen yıllarda çok fazla şampiyon oldu ve bütün kadro değişti. Koç ekibi, oyuncular ve baştan bir yapılanma oldu. Buraya geldiğimde de aslında şampiyon olmaya yetenek olarak hazır ama oyun bilgisi olarak ya da tecrübe olarak eksik bir takım vardı. Özellikle de iletişim sorunu çok fazla yaşıyorduk. Çünkü iki Koreli aldığınız an İngilizceleri zayıf olduğu için iletişim sorunu yaşıyorsunuz. Parus da çok tecrübeli bir oyuncu değil. Kofte de oyun içi kısmında çok konuşan bir oyuncu değil. İşte bunları çözmemiz biraz zaman aldı.
Uluslararası turnuvada şöyle bir meme var. Türk taraftarları elenince tecrübelendik diye her zaman Twitch chatine, Twitter'a yazılar yazıyor, paylaşımlar yapıyor. Bence bu mevsim, bu yıl Elmas'ta kesinlikle böyle bir şey görmeyeceğiz. Türk takımının çok iyi olduğunu düşünüyorum Fransa ve İspanya takımlarına karşı. Bence Türk takımları bu sene kendini kanıtlayacak.
Ve kendimize güveniyoruz ve yani mekanik olarak diğer takımlardan daha iyiyiz. Çok ekstra bir şey yok aslında gayet. Genelde korkmadan oynuyoruz ve daha iyiyiz. Yani şampiyon olacağımıza güveniyorum yani.
Giyu sıkıştırdı karaya.
Yap bakalım
Elramir yandan
orada.
bir vücut darbesi.
Güzel.
Elramir kuleye düşecek mi acaba? İyi Zonya Elramir de
Hadi
düşmüyor.
bakalım.
Kulenin
Hadi
hasarını bir
bakalım.
alsın. Elramir düşüyor mu kuleye? O da düşmedi. 3 skor Köfte'den.
EMEA Masters'ta en çok karşısında oynamak istediğim lig Fransa, çünkü bizim topluluklar arasında bayağı trash talk'lar falan geçiyordu. O yüzden yani kimin daha iyi olduğunu göstermek isterim yani. Biz daha iyiyiz.
İnsanlar EMEA Masters'ta neden IV'yi izlemeli? Çünkü Türkiye uzun yıllardır birçok yıldız oyuncu çıkartıyor. Closer, Caps, Humanoid, Broken Blade gibi. Geleceğin süperstarlarını izlemek istiyorsanız IV'yi EMEA Masters'ta izlemelisiniz.
Türkiye'deki e-spor topluluğu çok coşkulu bir topluluk. Kazanmayı bayağı seviyorlar, kaybedince de çok üzülüyorlar. Bu sene bizden beklentileri büyük. Biz de onların beklentilerini boşa çıkarmayacağız ve şampiyon olup kupayı İstanbul'a getireceğiz.
Well, I hope you guys learned a little bit more about the roster and what you can be expecting. And with the addition of TCL as well as MENA to this time's EMEA Masters, it brings a couple of questions on how they're going to be faring up against some of the teams coming favorites into this. For example, LDLC from the LFL.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of pressure, and they're kind of saying it in the video as well. There's a lot of expectations coming in as a Turkish team now, going into, well, EMEA Masters as well, and specifically because they're newcomers, and we already have so many set, well, I don't want to call it dynasties because I'm from the LEC, right?
Yeah.
But we already have some set, we already have some set regions, right? Like the LFL and like Spain as well, who took it last year. So coming in, you're kind of looking to just sweep the entire opposition, or at least that should be the goal of the Turkey region.
Yeah, you're trying to set your mark in the first tournament, right?
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
first impressions always very important.
Yeah.
Pretty much no matter where you are, and especially here in a tournament like this. I think especially for the TCL region, right? Moving down from Worlds play-ins to EMEA, for them, it's kind of a matter of pride to ensure that, you come here, you perform well. And I think there is no better matchup moving into LDLC, domestically, pretty much the strongest French team for splits now, back to back to back. If you can make your mark here, move on to semis, it's a good showing for the TCL as a whole.
It's already quite a good start. However, they're top of their groups. They're showing us what they're capable of. But they've also had those international performances as well. I mean, maybe it didn't go as you might have wanted them to go, from a
There
team,
was a few jobs here and there.
Yeah,
they got some wins.
Yeah, but that's an experience that you're bringing into this competition when you're going up against the like of LDLC, who've maybe also not really had what their expectations met.
I mean, it is still like new players coming in, right? So while the organization have been there, there's probably staff around it that has been to some of these international events. It's still the players having to go through this experience for the first time as well. But it kind of seemed like they're quite confident from the video we just saw as well. We're mechanically better than people here. Finals was so easy. I was kind of surprised. And hopefully they'll get more challenged as well playing against some of the other regions. Because if not, well, they are just going to sweep it all then.
Yeah, I mean, looks like they're being chilling, but they're going to be heading up against LDLC. And as we said ourselves, a little bit of a name here within EMEA Masters. Always the bridesmaids, however, never the bride. It feels like it's been a while since we've seen LDLC really lock in a win here, regardless of the fact that LFL is going so well for them.
Yeah, 3 titles back to back to back. Not bad domestically,
LFL,
if I do say so myself, in the LFL, of course. But here at EM, they just keep on tripping over themselves. When it gets to those big moments, the teams, in some cases, who they should just dispatch almost outright, it feels like by expectations, they've never been able to do it. Summer is the one that is really flaring to my mind from last year, where against Team Heretics, most people had Team Heretics down as pretty much just getting 3-0'd, but LDLC came in, had a little bit of disrespect on the day, and Team Heretics kind of just fell through because of the fairy tale story that they had to win.
It was the same for Spring as well. Like the fact that it was LDLC up towards that final, meeting K-Corp, then all of a sudden K-Corp that had been in a slump as well, and then all of a sudden actually just made it work and took another one into that one. So despite being the seed, coming in as the first seed so many times from this team, when it comes to EMEA Masters, they've just not been able to deliver to the same extent.
Maybe it's like a curse, but let's hope that history doesn't repeat themselves for their sake, because you're up against Wildcats, and the fact that this is a best of 5, also it's a single elimination bracket, so they lose, they're out.
It's going to be tough, and I think there's a lot of expectations because this was a roster last year which was kind of the generation of Miracle, let's be real, okay? The likes that they had, Yike, Dars, Exakick, people we have already highlighted in the LEC to a great extent, and now they've come in through with a complete revamp. Like LDLC was the talent factory, and that makes it even more so impressive. The fact that they lost those players, they still won the LFL this year in the spring.
Yeah.
And now with a completely new roster, is taking to the stage of EMEA Masters, hopefully exceeding the losses that they had in former tournaments.
Yeah, you know, sometimes you'd imagine talent factory like LDLC, they'll go through slumps, right? You know, you end up selling your best players, then you have to go through that slight rebuilding period. Not these guys, apparently.
Yo!
You know, straight up just first place again. So it says to me that, you know, the systems behind the scenes, they're working, right? And it's definitely something that's kind of rare throughout a lot of the ERLs to see a team basically just fresh rebuild into first place again. So for LDLC, I expect, you know, internally, the expectations are still very high for them. When you've got players who are performing as well as they are, especially for me, it's always been about the man in the mid lane, seeing Backlund come from the NLC to the LFL.
Yeah, speaking about Backlund as well, that's one of the players that we're looking to highlight coming into this matchup, especially considering how himself and his counterpart Bao, who is, however, in the bot lane, have been performing this time around. When we're looking at the meta shift, especially more focused towards that bot lane, it's going to be a question of which one of these players is just got to get the rest of the team on their back.
Yeah, it just functions differently as well, right? On one side with Backlund as well as Guy, you can take charge from the mid lane on control mages, be a reliable carry, have that pressure as well, but also not afraid to lock in the likes of LeBlanc, something he's done back from all his NLC days too, where you can actually play that mid-jungle 2v2, get pressure there, take over the map through an individual lead. And that might be really important as well, because if you can't maybe bridge mid lane pressure down towards the bot side, you might struggle with Bao, who's had a really good tournament so far.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the approach from both teams, right? If the Wildcats want to get Bao ahead, as they so often have been, you can see by the stats. It's also individual prowess too. It's not even necessarily about team play. Then I feel like they may have to actually start from like sort of the textbook position, which is play through the mid jungle first and try to shut down the LDLC, right? I feel like that is very oftentimes the win condition is having Backlund be on picks where he has a lot of freedom to not only impact his own lane individually with agency, but then shift it to that side and, like you say, be the bridge. And I feel like if LDLC are able to actually move that pressure down towards the bottom side where it feels like Wildcats' big win condition can be so consistently through Bao, then the Wildcats may have to look towards the top side instead, which I'm not saying Destroy can't be that carry, but in this kind of meta where bot side, Dragon's objectives early on so important, you want to be able to get the resources into your AD carry as soon as possible.
Yeah, looking as well at the bot lane from Wildcats especially, when we're looking at Bao, it feels like a lot of time they're just left to their own devices. From the rest of the team, they're going towards the mid side, they're looking to get the pressure there. So in that regards, when we're speaking about getting the pressure onto bot lane, how are we expecting that to translate in relation to the bot lane from LDLC?
Well, I think it's going to be interesting because Jeskla as well has been the kind of player back when he played on Vitality B as well, where he did not get a lot of resources from his team. They were very top-side, mid-side focused, so it's not like it's a playstyle he isn't used to. I think it's really interesting the point about impacting the map as well, because we have seen support of Wildcats as well be really good on the Thresh when they played against Heretics as well. Had really good map movement as well to just outroam, had a better timer, and got the movement up towards mid lane, got a kill there, can move into Herald as well. I think it's going to be really niche how they use these timers as well, either in terms of, okay, we're actually getting this to take care of the enemy bot lane, get the plate for itself, get an individual gold lead, or make that individual gold lead a team lead elsewhere with the pressure on the map.
Okay, well, we're going to find out whether or not bot lane is the lane to be keeping our eyes out as we're going to be heading in the first game of today, this best of 5. We have Alex, Sam, and Trouble on the cast. It's a trio.
It is a trio. Thank you very much, Ginny and crew. I'm Sam. That's Alex. That's Trouble, otherwise known as the boys.
I don't know or initialize Georgia and EMEA.
We were formerly known as the boys, but of course, in honor of the Spanish region and the Heretics winning last tournament, we are now Los Hombres. I think that works. We're workshopping.
Does that mean the boys?
I think it does.
All right, cool.
It is now. There you go. Well, after that debacle, let's maybe talk a little bit about this tournament, because we are finally into the playoff bracket and things have kind of been in a state of change. It does feel like there is a changing of a guard, a changing of an era here in the now EMEA Masters, away from what used to be just the EU Masters.
Does really feel like the times are changing. We have such a different kind of landscape. A lot of things that we have assumed to be taken for granted have changed a little. For the first time in 3 years, we have every single first seed coming out of groups being from a different region. That's LFL, Prime League, TCL, and the PG Nats as well. Incredibly crazy in terms of how things turned out in that regard. No NLC in quarterfinals, no Ultra League in quarterfinals as well, and no play-ins teams making it out of groups. If there is any reason to kind of like take stock of what has happened between previous years and now, all of these reasons factor into it.
And I think as well, it is worth paying attention that 2 of these teams are from regional heavyweights in a lot of ways. We've got the LFL and we've got the Turkish region, and not just any teams from their regions, like the teams from their regions, right, Georgia?
I feel like we had the cool kid at school, right? LDLC, the LFL, they're coming in as the cool kids. They're wearing sunglasses. They show up in their very expensive convertible car at school. And then suddenly one day they turn up and there's another convertible parked right where it was their spot. And I think this is what the TCL is going to do at EMEA Masters. We felt like the LFL was unshakable from that first spot. The LVP came up in summer and they said, well, no, but spring has been traditionally the LFL season. For the past 4 years, there hasn't been a single other region that have won but the LFL in spring. And guys, I'm just going to spoil something. This is spring in EMEA Masters.
Oh boy, well, it'll be a question then whether the Wildcats can get their claws out and cut them down to size. We are into draft for our first game here of our first quarterfinals for EMEA Masters 2023 here in spring. Couple key bands coming out already, the Sejuani, the Rakan, and of course the Sion as well.
And now, first things I really want to kind of draw my eyes to in the first couple of picks and bans is what's going to be happening with the bot lane meta. I think that we've kind of assumed that the same bot lanes come out from a lot of different teams now. Both these teams have a slightly different take on things though. Bao has not played a game of Zeri at this tournament, nor has this team really banned the Zeri either. They don't really care to do that. They play stuff like the Aphelios, they play stuff that can really deal with it in lane, even stuff like Varus coming through from other teams too, whereas Jeskla on the other side has just been on the Zeri hype train.
I wouldn't be surprised right here if an Aphelios lock-in came in or a Jinx lock-in. They don't seem to necessarily care what matchup they're playing it into, as long as they lock in that one hyper carry that Bao is going to want in that particular game, and a space making either support or jungler. So right here, with Vi banned, you can pretty much pick any mobility carry you want.
Great stuff from both of you there, but a quick note on just a technical point. It's not patch 13.4, it is patch 13.6. So just do keep an eye on that bottom one. That'll get adjusted later. We did get a heads up from production. But yeah, it is not 13.4, it is 13.6. It does mean things like that Jinx are pretty damn high priority, as you called out a moment ago.
Yeah, and Jinx, we saw that a lot in LEC just the other day, actually. This has been a pick.
It's not broken at all.
It's not broken at all, especially when it outranges pretty much every other counterpart in the meta. And it feels like some of that backline access we've used to see over these years. I mean, this time last year, Jinx Aphelios was the meta, right? A lot of that hasn't really come through. We don't have as many Leonas, we don't have as many Ornns being picked, stuff like that, which can always reach the Jinx. If you manage to stand behind a strong frontline, something like Kryze's Sion comes to mind as well, that Jinx can free fire and outdamage pretty much any counterpart on the rift.
Now, though, we've got to figure out what they want to lock in alongside it. Debating that Maokai, it's something that White has played a number of times already across this split, and they'll pick that up very fast.
This is just, if I turn all nameplates off, I would think that Wildcats have the draft on the right so far. They've been prioritizing their hyper carry. In this case, is going to be the Aphelios for them, and I want to see what they're going to choose to create space.
Yes.
That space creating champion in this particular instance is going to be the Rumble. Destroy is the only player that we have in EMEA Masters that plays exclusively AP carry top laners. And on the other hand side, we have a guy that has been known to play AD carry top laners.
Specifically.
Kryze. But this time he's going to be with 30 and lock in the Sion.
The Sion's there now, but this is now a really awkward top lane.
It's lethality Sion, guys.
It does AD, it can carry. No, it's not the same. It's definitely not a marksman. And what it definitely isn't is as tanky into the Rumble matchup as we have seen before. A couple of patches ago, Rumble got some huge buffs. That was actually on the patch. Again, it's 13.6, remember, but on 30.5, Rumble's E had a huge buff to it. So now if you got two overheated Electro Harpoons, I remember the name. You get 40% MR shreds. Even if you are super tanky and you go towards a load of MR items on that Sion, Rumble doesn't really give a damn and can start really bullying about that lane.
Also, the most popular items currently are the ones that deal percentage HP, right? And Sion loves building that HP in his kit. Of course, going to the second rotation right here, the two junglers have been locked in, so have the top laners and the AD carries, and we're looking at these supports. Of course, traditionally, LDLC would leave counterpick top lane for Kryze and ban top laners, but it's still the case with Sion being locked in.
Yeah, so one thing which I'm looking at LDLC here right now, that should really be a Jace ban coming out next as well. It's going to be the Blitzcrank instead. Now, Kofte has been playing a lot of Jason mid lane, which allows you to play some more of these AP champions top side without doubling up on the AP. If you're building up loads of MR, then it loses a lot of value to something like a Rumble, which loves flat magic penetration to get the most damage onto something like that Jinx. Remember when we were talking about the Jinx start of the draft? It's about having access to it. I think now, if you have the Wildcats locking in Rumble alongside that Jace, there's a really good chance that a couple of skill shots land, just the mechanics happen and they come out, the skill shots are on point, and the Jinx can't fight.
couple bans against Backlund. It'll be the Wind brothers that are banned away.
LeBlanc is still open.
Is LeBlanc still open? Yeah,
Very true,
still
very
open.
true.
Backlund's pool is often very much towards those aggressive assassin-style picks, and with the way the meta has been going recently, I was about to say you often leave supports till that last pick, but instead they will be giving that option of counter pick up to Backlund, and it's the Renata locked in for Zoelys.
This has been one of the huge lock-ins, especially when you have an Aphelios, right, in a team fight. The second that Renata hits, usually Aphelios is run cleanse, but if that cleanse is not there instantly on the ultimate from Renata, you can pretty much 100-0 any of your teammates, and especially since you have two semi-squishy champions so far. I'm looking right here, potentially going towards that bot lane, something like the Kent has been played before since the thresh has been taken away, that can very easily save you from that hostile takeover.
Could also be Nautilus if it's just early fighting potential. Time Catch has been coming out, and that could particularly be pretty important to, again, kind of add
You know
some
what I miss,
extra
man?
Yeah?
The Kiana Rumble combo.
Oh,
I miss that.
yes! So that actually, funny story, that's one of my favorite team compositions of all time is Kiana Jones and the Carpets of Doom, because everything rolls out in the same way. It's awesome. The carpet which you're going to have to worry about here, though, is actually the Maokai and the Renata, which doesn't quite sound as nice in Champion Select. I haven't really thought of a name for that one.
Not if you're playing against them.
But what I love about this Champion Select is we immediately ask that question of Aphelios, Jinx, where is your backline access? How are you reaching these AD carries? Both of these teams now have Gragas ults, Rumble, you've got the Renata ult on the other side as well, to reach those AD carries and threaten them in team fights.
I just feel like right here, LDLC have outranged Wildcats because Wukong wants to be pretty up and close and personal. Gragas does the same thing. And then you have a Rumble that he is a melee champion even though he does have the flamethrower, right? So you have to get close and you might end up getting burned yourself. Look at the range with the Jinx, you said it yourself. So pretty much outranges any AD carry out there. You've got Syndra that wants to poke you, and of course Maokai with the saplings. At this point, I feel like if Wildcats do not get a very decisive engage on a champion 100% to 0, I feel like LDLC have so much range to play with.
What I will say though is completely agree with you there, and that front to back is certainly in place with that range. There are the tools on the side of Wildcats to try and make those engage with the Wukong, with the Gragas, with the Rumble up flying in from miles away. You have at least got those tools to make it happen, but you're right. The onus is on them to try and get within that range and get past that front line, which could otherwise be a little tricky to deal with.
So loading into this first game, of course, is one of our very first matchups between TCL and LFL. This could be the start of a hell of a rivalry, looking at these regions with all of their fan bases really following them, with all of this noise surrounding these two champions of these storied regions. We're hitting the Rift, and this could be some red ink in the book of these two chapters.
I was talking to some Turkish casters, and they were like, even though Foot is in the tournament, the people's hearts belong with Wildcats. The entire national pride belongs with Wildcats. And right here, getting into your first quarterfinals and beating the #1 seed from the LFL is a statement.
On to the Rift we go for the first time this EMEA Masters quarterfinals. LFL versus Turkey. LDLCOL versus the Wildcats. These two teams have been synonymous with their regions. You heard from Trouble that in a lot of ways Wildcats hold the hearts of the Turkish fans. LDLCOL looking to maybe start a little bit of spiciness at the level 1, but not going to find too much as yet.
I actually love the way Bao moved right there. He didn't necessarily stay into the tribush. He walked towards the pit, which means that if a 5-man happens, whether it's from the top or bot side, he will be able to get away straight away and also spot the invade happening, which they will know there will be also very deep wards. So Elramir here has the chance to go completely unspotted if he wants to.
That level 1 positioning is the positioning of a man who's been traumatized by a level 1. You've sat in that tribush before, and you've been hooked by a Blitzcrank, you've been smashed by a Sion. We've all been there at some point. Not in this one, but there is a fully charged Sion key.
Wait, there's a handshake?
I really don't like at level 1.
Okay, it's called a handshake. It's not a hook.
I mean, maybe it's a really aggressive handshake.
True, can be a
What
hook.
the hell does that mean? You know what? I didn't really think
Have you ever been aggressively handshook?
this time yet.
I mean, Renata clearly does, though. Maybe she's got it all down on lock. Other people, as well as to bring up the runes there quickly. Nothing super unusual, but it is a double comet for the solo laners of Wildcats.
So every time there's a Sion in the game, my head goes back to Season 2 with the lane swaps. My head goes straight to Adam clearing the entire jungle together with his jungler and assisting there, or simply just stealing buffs or stealing jungle and then TPing back, into your lane. This time, Kryze is not going to opt to do any of that. I haven't necessarily seen Kryze go for any juicy level 1s with the Sion yet. He's just going to walk back to his lane. What is very important here, though, is that Wildcats know that the red buff has been warded. because the invade happened with a 5-man at the very beginning. So Elramir can clear this out and then completely disappear in fog of war.
Yeah, and particularly with that level 1 as well, we caught that on screen. Kryze just missing that first Q of lane as well onto Destroy. Destroy has the Ignite, but these are likely going to be 1v1, 1v2 scenarios for Destroy in this top side if White sticks around that top side. But he already has that information on where White is heading. He's already trading pretty well in lane. These individual laning advantages, gonna have to keep an eye on that because both of these teams have had a lot of success through individual plays from each of these members. We've talked about Kryze, of course, having like a carry history. We've talked about Destroy having these carries in the top lane as well. Backlund on your screen, also in that list.
Now, Georgia, you had your own thoughts a little bit on kind of the differences in these playstyles because they are so similar in some ways and different in others in terms of what they get up to in terms of setting up for those big team fights, setting up to carry through some quite different players, really.
Yeah, I'm just gonna walk everyone back to LEC Winter when it was all about get a very proactive jungle, get the Sejuanis, the Maokais, the Javans, and just perma camp bot lane. Whether it's to cover a gank, whether it's to gank yourself, whether it's one buff into a gank instantly and try to get that bot lane snowballing. Now, this can still be the meta, but the more new and improved meta that is being played across the world right now is the support linking up with the jungler, linking up with the mid lane and shutting down that mid straight off the get-go, which is something that Wildcats have actually instantly adapted to. Now, while my head is going a little bit scrambled here, I'm like, I've loved what Parus has done with this sort of linking up with their jungler, right? But right here he's playing a Lulu. He's not necessarily one of my favorite roaming chops to look at.
Flash polymorph, let's go.
Well, I mean, from Heal Assign.
Like, yeah, regardless of whether like it is a roaming champion, there are still some like transferable skills, right? Which typically happen when you're winning lane. You get to push in the first few levels, do something like a cheat to recall, and then kind of get your support out on the map. And it would allow you to answer plays around this mid lane when this kind of wave state comes out, when actually Kofte would really like to be resetting at some point, rather than potentially being a danger of Backlund landing some hard trades.
And another kind of, well, maybe we'll hold that discussion as White might have found himself a little bit of a wraparound gank here to the back end of it all. Parus Bao, though, wise to that attempted gank, and will not find too much. Actually, the trade coming on through nonetheless. Now down comes White, forced the flash out of Parus. The summoner spell advantage thus far towards the Wildcats.
Yeah, that wave was a little bit doomed because it was pushing towards LDLC. So Wildcats had to take the 50-50 right there, had to crash in the wave, try to push, but they didn't wait enough for Elramir to get there from base. But just a very quick trade towards the top side of the map. Again, that wave was a little bit doomed in the bot lane, therefore it costed Parus both of his summoners. We might expect White to get back towards that bot lane and capitalize on the Lulu.
So we've seen a lot of it, kind of action around this bot side now. Just want to talk about something though which has happened here though. You'll notice this certain item in inventory of Kryze. He says, hey, that's a color
Maybe it is lethality.
What he says is, like, look, I'm going to be left alone here, and if I'm going to be left alone, I at least want to get my money's worth.
Well, one way to deal with the
Sion, you can expect a lot.
And in fairness to Destroy, already coming up with a very nice little trade on the top side, forcing that flash with the Ignite, as we kind of noticed earlier, and kind of understand why Kryze decided, you know what, maybe I just buy this cull and try and survive and turn up the team fights with a little bit more gold.
Now, the very important thing is, we have talked a lot about these teams sort of like linking up. The bot lane remains the same. They will always want to play towards that bot lane. They have Bao, has one of the best stats in the tournament for AD carry. They have Jeskla, who we've known through Europe to be one of the most potent AD carries. So my eyes go straight towards that dragon that has not been touched. But the problem for Wildcats is your support has no flash, very susceptible to getting killed. So getting into this river to ward when you're that squishy is very difficult.
Why that's also really important as well. Both these bot lanes just reset. We've seen Parus hanging around this mid lane, hanging around the bot side river, as we've known him to do. Just gives you that extra kind of difficulty to actually make plays at that point, as you've been pointing out. Not having that flash means that maybe you could be the first target at the end of the day.
Maybe that's why he was waiting behind the wall.
And you're also sat there as, you know, level 4 Lulu. Not exactly the most survivable champion in the game. But again, look at this. This mid-jungle trio from the Wildcats, making sure that they're in the right place at the right time for a wave crash to come in. This could potentially lead to a first dragon of the game as well. Dragon stacking has been something which has been very potent from Wildcats through their group stage.
There's been this thing with LDLC where if Backlund gets shut down, if Kryze gets shut down on a carry, it feels like the team cannot fight necessarily. They sort of like put their hands up, they give up, they expect their enemies to make a mistake, and if the mistake never happens, they sort of bleed out and end up losing. Now, why I really like the playstyle of Wildcats, where they link up towards that mid lane with the support in the jungle, is that Syndra is very immobile. Once that Gragas is level 6, once that Wukong has a Cyclone, you can very easily shut down Backlund, shut down that Syndra, or even take his flash, which means that for the Syndra to walk into the river through these choke points, it's going to get very dangerous.
It's worth noting, though, of course, with a Maokai, once you hit level 6 on both of those mid-junglers for LDLC, they've got a pretty potent little pick and execute combo there, if they can make it happen. But of course, wait for that to come on through. Syndra, notoriously very good at that level 6 point when some of those kill combos can start to come through. But Destroy, using that pressure on topside to go in for a very aggressive red buff invade.
So there are two ways you play around topside in the current meta. One is you play something like Galio or something like that, and you hype go towards topside. Not many teams do that. Typically that's been kind of related towards Sejuani. The other side is put everything towards bot side and remove the focus on that lane. That has allowed now, because everyone's focused around bot side, this entrance in towards this dragon, which means that both these top laners kind of make their own way down after being reset.
I love the way that Wildcats came out of the tribals right there, because they split apart Jeskla from the rest of his team, which means that if this Jinx wants to walk in to put down any auto attacks, he's gonna get caught off guard on the other side. The cross-map play doesn't come from a different team. It's Wildcats versus Wildcats. They take the dragon and they take the red buff.
And you see actually level 6 in the Gragas also threatening at that point too. A lot of CC to potentially throw out Backlund's flash on the other side. And Wildcats from this last period of play, the one thing which I really want to talk about here is that Wildcats, a lot of what they're doing is just generally good League of Legends. The overall level of this team coming in, I mean, there were obviously some questions about how the TCL would pair up and match up against the champions of the LFL in general, right? But as this whole team has come through, the overall quality has been good in regards to the macro and how they view the game.
Here we go in the bot side, though. LDLC turning up bot. We've seen this a few times before. Moonlight Vigil comes on through. Zoelys, though, gets off a good hostile takeover. They're going straight on the Lulu. First blood over to white. They flash on out and secure first blood.
Oh god, I could have seen this go so many wrong ways for LDLC, but one way they do like to play is through the bot lane.
Oh yeah.
We mentioned how white will get towards the bot to either cover or gank themselves. He's been there 4 times so far. They said 3rd time's the charm. This time it was 4th time the charm. Bao summoners down, Parus summoners down, so they can rinse and repeat.
And we were kind of asking for it, talking about how, wow, Wildcats, great overall level, this team, they're so good at the fundamentals of League of Legends. You did. You could have really, you could have really covered for me there. Shows that to you. And no one was covering for Wildcats on that bot side. Mid lane was reset. Jungle was on top side of the map. You're stuck under your tower. Sure, maybe you think that tower is safe, but Wildcats didn't manage to get under there in time, and they lose for it.
But one thing that's very uncharacteristic is usually the Bao remains in the bot lane and Rift Herald goes to enemy team because he takes tower platings. Now that Bao went down, sorry, the bot lane went down, Parus, from this gang that gave the opening to Elramir to play towards Destroy, that has had so far a pretty good laning phase, has stolen the red buff, they have the Rift Herald, so now Bao doesn't have to necessarily do it on his own with Parus and win that 2v2 to get the tower platings. They have the Rift Herald to feed money to the Aphelios if they want to.
Might as well at this point bring up those numbers that Destroy's been putting up, because he's on the Rumble into the Sion, and as you can see across the tournament, he has been putting up, frankly, obscene differences in the top lane.
Gold at 15?
Yep, on average.
Yeah, that's some bank. That's some bank right there. I didn't quite realize, because I knew that, you know, we talked about his individual laning, and he had an awful lot of solo kills in the group stage as well, particularly on stuff like the Rumble. He was playing it into the Kennen, another really powerful top lane carry right now. He'd play carry versus carry, and he would absolutely mash face. What we've seen in this game is, again, as we've been highlighting so far, taking control of the lane, taking control of the top side of the map. As soon as he comes to play, this Rumble has forever been an answer into a mobile backline. He's going to have a lot of gold to make that stick.
You know, I was looking at what happened in the bot lane where they were clearing the ward, and then you see the little sapling in there, and instantly I thought, who's that Pokemon? And it's like, it's gonna be the Maokai, isn't it? Because every single time the camera pans towards that bot side of the map,
and now you've
white
mentioned
is
that,
there.
Now I need to see like Maokai with like an Alolan Executor skin, you know, like the giant palm tree with the eggs on top of it. If you're not a Pokemon enjoyer,
that's a very niche reference.
Just go Google it. It looks hilarious. I'd love that. I'd love
it's
the Maokai
also
skin for that in the
season
game.
1, so I don't know, man.
It's time to turn up bot again, though, as over comes not the Alolan Executor, but white on the Maokai.
Who's there?
Who's that jungler? It's white in the bot lane. Feels like that has been an LDLC special.
Just flash onto the ward there. Kofte's finally getting out of his lane though. It has felt like Backlund using this Syndra to keep Kofte in line, keeping him in mid lane, means that LDLC have been more free to play towards the bot side of the map without the Gragas threat.
And can I say that I'm a little bit impressed by what LDLC have been showing so far? Because usually Wildcats will take individual leads from every single laner and then translate into team fights.
Speaking of, they've gone for the gank in mid lane. You said the Syndra's a little immobile and Backlund throws out a scat of the week. But unfortunately, Syndra was weaker than a Cyclone and falls down for a kill in mid.
So Backlund had been doing really well at just keeping this Gragas in lane. Yes, but then it doesn't mean that suddenly the mid jungle doesn't. If you're not there, things change quite a lot. Even if you are there, very big kill combo coming out from Gragas and the Wukong, particularly around their own level 6s.
I'm honestly very surprised that the Rift Herald got dropped mid lane. I feel like what Wildcats are trying to do right here is that if LDLC start losing towers, they usually start bleeding very slowly. There doesn't seem to be one player in the team that is willing to push that trigger for the engage, and this happened a lot with the Unicorns of Love games, both that they played. They lost that mid lane tower, and ever since that they just kept falling more and more behind, and I feel like Wildcats have read them, because Gragas is not necessarily the champion you want to be giving your money early on when you have an Aphelios and a Rumble in the top lane, but opening up that mid lane, pushing Backlund further back into his lane allows you to get deeper vision and start getting these team fights that you're so good at.
Worth noting as well that actually the Cull cashed in pretty early on for Jeskla, and actually one off for Kryze has already got a number of plays down the bot lane, or the top lane rather, gets the equalizer topside, and for all that we were just praising Destroy's great numbers, actually Kryze is up in a little bit of gold despite being down in CS. He's got the plates, and that's largely true across the board outside of jungle. LDLCOL playing out this early game pretty smoothly.
And that's also their ult topside. I like to call that the Trace Rumble ult, for those of you who are Korean League of Legends enjoys around Season 5, the old Jin top laner. He always used to do that wave clear ultimate, associate that with him. What that takes is those that you're not going to get that dragon. We've now split those early dragons. We're not going to see early stacking from the Wildcats, which they did fairly consistently over the side of their group stages. For me, as the game goes on, it does feel like both these teams are very willing to fight around those dragons as it comes on. Yeah, there were the Unicorns of Love games where LDLC was like, wait, when do we fight ever? That was a very difficult couple of games for them. But on the whole, I think that both of these teams have been willing to mechanically check each other. So making sure that the early dragons aren't stacked so far in one advantage to force you into fighting against a soul later into the game too early can be a big factor between these two teams later on.
I just feel like that the Thresh ban has hurt Wildcats a little bit in the early game. You would usually see that Parus would have been mid lane and impacted that lane already. Even if it wasn't the kill, it could have been Backlund's flash. In this case, he's playing the Lulu. He's mostly covering if he roams. He's not there to necessarily gank with his jungler, and then he goes straight back down because Bao did not have his flash. Therefore, he could not be solo in this lane because he could get caught out. So I feel like the fact that it's kind of like seeing Hylissang on Lulu, something just doesn't sit right when I see Parus on a more passive enchanter kind of role rather than a facilitator and an engager.
And it does feel a little bit like, for both of these pretty heavy team fights, as skirmishing teams, we're kind of waiting for our first real conflict in this game. We've seen the gank bot, we've seen the gank mid, and they were nice, and otherwise it's kind of been trades back and forth in terms of how laning has gone. That's a game that is marginally in favor of LDLC. They're up about 1,000 gold with turret plates falling, and that's great news for them, especially considering some of the lane assignments, say, as we said, that Rumble from the top side. But we are still kind of waiting on that first explosive moment to give us a read on where these teams are at.
I just find really cool how they had 2 points of vision on their back, because they are very scared of Elramir getting behind enemy lines and punishing the solo lanes, especially since Backlund did not have his flash available. So LDLC are extremely cautious on the map of how aggressive Wildcats are playing in the early game.
Kryze? In a lot of danger. Has the equalizer land down? Remember there's the ignite on Destroy as well. He's just stood there and queued. That's very dangerous. But the turnaround with the ult of his own is phenomenal. But Destroy flashes on out. Destroy by name, destroy by nature.
It's the item. You've got that demonic embrace. You have the buffs to Rumble for the extra MR shred when you get those electro harpoons down. For all we'd said, hey, Kryze keeping this top lane in check. That's a bit of an awkward moment in this match.
Oh. That's correct. Georgia with the very succinct and accurate description. Mid lane though, LDLC looking to punish back. Elramir taken pretty low, but the Psycho doing pretty good work. Cass comes through, knocks White back. That's the tower falling down. Into the bailout goes White, but there's just nothing to be done. Tower and an additional kill to the Wildcats in mid lane.
I love how Wildcats have found how to exploit LDLC on the map. Open that mid lane, force everyone further behind enemy lines, which means now all the visions from LDLC will get defensive, all the visions from Wildcats will get offensive, which means that now that you have a fed Rumble, a fed Wukong, a Gragas that can look for casts, good luck for LDLC face-checking when they've got their squishes towards that bot side of the map.
Yeah, but particularly as we get through to, we'll watch what happens in the next few minutes because Dragon's coming up in the next 2 minutes. If this mid lane outer turret now leads to Vision going to the Wildcat side and then LDLC try and make some maybe half-baked engages like this again, things get very difficult. Bao, great position in this fight, stands behind people, more tanky than him and gets damage off, uses the Gale Force power spike, Gale Force and Aphelios. He doesn't always need, you know, the extra attack speed of something like a Kraken Slayer. Having that Gale Force forward to keep his guns firing is very important. Big win, big show of how Bao can play out these games.
I was hiding.
Yeah, he was a bit. That's a very large twitch. He looks a bit more like a Sion, funnily enough. But there we go. Gets a decimating smash off, and maybe worth a little bit of a check-in here as well in terms of the gold here, because it has been a very tight game, but just slightly LDLC favored until just lately, where it's kind of pulled its way back up again.
And I just want to see how LDLC is going to bounce back from that. Them losing towers, them losing vision has caused them to slowly bleed games out, especially versus Unicorns of Love, who is the other dominant force in this tournament. Now Wildcats as well, they have known this, therefore they go both the Heralds, which is very uncharacteristic for Wildcats, to open up that mid lane.
So a big thing from this though, we talked about what would happen with mid lane falling, what's going to happen with Vision. Look at what's happening around here. Pink ward's getting put down and being defended. LDLC, they did lose that tower, but they've still got their items, they're still in gold right now, and as it stands, when it comes to this Dragon, we're still on even footing when it comes to that Vision.
I just want to point out where Backlund is, because they have warded everything in that bot quadrant, which means that Backlund knows exactly where the Vision is, knows exactly where his enemies are, and if you get hit by one of these spheres from Syndra, you're going to get instantly jumped on.
Okay, watch out for this choke point. So many of these champions want to play around them.
That's exactly what happens straight away. Kofte has to flash.
Just look at Destroy. If you see anyone grouping up in this kind of entrance to the river, Destroy is going to absolutely melt face.
I think what's also very important is to look at Renata and how the hostile takeover is going to go, because there is no cleanse for Aphelios. He can very easily 100% to 0 one team.
Kryze on the flank. Elramir thinking about going forward to go for the steal. He's chased up by the chompers. In comes the ultimate. But the Nature's Grasp alongside the Equalizer turning, and Elramir made large with that one. Parus just about alive. Kofte on the flank, about to get hit by a decimating smash. But Instable Wildcats taken out of the river, and LDLC claim a second dragon for themselves.
This is kind of the capitalization, the culmination of everything which happened after this mid lane play. So while LDLC lost the fight and the mid lane tower, they got back out onto the map and reclaimed Vision before that dragon came up. Objective setup went their way. Meant they could hold their ground, meant they could play around the Maokai ult and their extended range.
And I also love the instant macro play coming in from Backlund right here. TP straight up top lane, forcing someone from Wildcats to reply before they take that reset, meaning that he's free to get that reset himself, because they're not gonna be he's not gonna be getting engaged on, since all of the ultimates and items all of the ultimates are gone and items have remained the same.
That does feel to be the case, and well, it's our first real look at a skirmish that, outside of that mid lane play anyway, did feel a little bit like I was expecting a bit more of that. I was expecting some kills, all of that kind of jazz, but the Ultimates did a really good job there from LDLC to zone people off, and we kind of see a little bit of what both cops want to do around those choke points, around those objectives. First time around goes to LDLC.
So, I mean, not to say that it was called pretty early, but Trouble highlighted this very early on into the draft, where as soon as the Jinx was locked in, you think, Jinx is really long range. Jinx can just sit there and stand behind people. And you look at how Wildcats played out that last dragon, they just struggled to close that distance.
You should have looked how Elramir did not play this dragon, because the second he got anywhere near, he got sphered in the face, into roots from Maokai, into jumpers from Jinx, into hostile takeover.
Yes.
He could not move, and I feel like Wildcats read this really quickly and easily and run away, because one, get excited by Jinx, one takedown, and she will run over your entire team. I think this is why we haven't seen such a bloodthirsty game, because Wildcats have been very careful to not get snowballed.
Goes over the wall to Elramir, but he's polymorphed and turned from a tree into a small rabbit. Just to back on out for now, and it does sort of feel like you see the counter-engage tools and the front line to keep this Jinx alive from LDLC is so potent if you're coming in from one angle, from one choke point. And we've seen how dangerous Jinx can be over the last few weeks, particularly when she's got something like a Sion and a Maokai to set up for her.
So what's going to help with that as well is the itemization. These are tank-killing items. Liandry's, it basically has a Lord Dom's passive on it, which gives you more damage against people who have more HP than you. You've got the Void Staff on top of that as well, and then you have the HP % burn as well. But Backlund is looking at the first target into the fight saying, you are dying, and Jinx is going to reset after that point. So, Wildcats need to be very tight about how they engage fights, and as you were saying, Trouble, before, how Elramir actually gets to play these fights.
Yeah, because Elramir is going to be the first person that this Syndra sees in a team fight, right? And he cannot walk forward, because even if you don't kill the Wukong, if he's not there to steal the objective that you started, it's a successful objective set up by LDLC. And so far, they've gotten the 2 dragons that they set up for, and they're looking pretty healthy. Even though that mid lane tower has gone down, they kept that line of vision pretty deep into enemy jungle.
Really nice stuff from LDLC here, actually, to just blot out a lot of this vision across the map from the Wildcats. Wildcats are so used to having the vision advantage. Observers, is there any chance we can switch this over to Wildcats vision very quickly? Because they see this ultimate coming out of nowhere.
Oh.
This is so dangerous!
My god, the hostile takeover brings so many people down, but the turnaround with the equalizer looks good for a moment. But it is just a trade of ultimates, and the tower falls in favor of LDLC.
Those ultimates came out of absolutely nowhere. Zoelys gets out of that vision line. White was off the vision, casting that ult as well. Now, nothing comes of it. Besides the turret being taken, that will help LDLC kind of have another platform for their vision game after this point. But the Wildcats, they're really waiting on mistakes now.
Here we go, a little bit like that. Parus taken solo. A wild growth keeps him just about alive. A cast to disengage. White just out of range of the twisted advance.
Destroy.
Teleport in from behind. Elramir looking for a flank. Gets onto White with a crushing blow, but not too much more. Destroy. Was in that bush, but teleport is summoned and no one dies again. It has been a lot of near misses for both teams now.
Now, this is what happens when you do not necessarily have a very tanky member to walk in for deep vision into enemy territory. If you are a Lulu and you're so squishy, reaching deep into enemy jungle is very dangerous, and we just showcased why. Lost both the summoners, costed Aphelios a cleanse right there as well. The ultimate is down, which means that now LDLC get the time and the chance to set down their own vision. And if you look over to LDLC, if they do lose vision, they have a Sion, they have a Maokai that can face check for them. They've got a bunch of things like the Zapper from Jinx as well. They have tools to be able to move into bushes and get that vision. On the other side, for Wildcats, they don't really have that.
And that was something which they did have in groups. You highlighted the Thresh, there are other picks. Parus in particular has been very good the minute before an objective at getting into that side of the map, combing up with Elramir or Kofte and getting something done.
Boy.
They're not here on the top side of the map either. Vision is blotted out for them, but Elramir does have a flank.
Look at Kryze, look at Kryze. He's coming from the bot side river.
Destroy's not there, remember, he has no teleport. Goodbye, Parus, deleted from the rift. After Sion comes charging on in, that trade was definitely without breaks. Backlund looking to ward off the Monkey King on the side. Kofte trying to zone up a bow, has to flash over the wall. Now trying to turn over, but will be hostile taken over. Zoelys gets Kofte, trying to trade on up that. Moonlight Vigil goes wide. In goes Elramir though, trying to get onto White, doesn't get that much damage. So Zoelys is very deep without his mana. Bow gets that one destroyed. Looking for the angle,
Jinx
looking for some more. Jinx will come flying on in, and she is so damn excited to be here. Backlund picks up Elramir, and LDLC OL wipe the floor around the Baron Pit with the Wildcats.
Easy as you like from the LFL champions. They choke out the vision, invite the Wildcats into the Baron Pit without the right kind of setup. Parus caught out again. Wildcats can't find themselves a way into the fight. Now it's Destroy versus the world.
They're not clearing the ward. They're not clearing the ward.
They don't
give
it up. It got a little bit dicey. I saw the angle, smite or not. But either way, it's still LDLC that come away with it.
Yeah, and as we can see this again, Kryze had a fantastic flank. So whoever walks through that choke point where Lulu is just gonna get absolutely demolished. Again, Lulu, no summoners right there, very easy to pick up. But look about, he can't walk in. The distance that all of these spells from LDLC create have to force him to flash over the wall, get far away from his team because he doesn't have cleanse for the postal takeover. And then when he tries to make a play and Jinx gets one kill in return, she just runs down your entire team.
It feels like it's a retreat right the way through this fight, and there's no one stood in front of Bao after that point. Particularly when you lose that Lulu very early on. Lulu, I mean, let's be honest, if you played Enchanters at any point in League's history, you're pretty used to being focused in a number. You're pretty used to getting focused at the start of fights because you're easy to kill. And if Aphelios doesn't have the extra shielding and the extra ultimate coming through from Lulu, things get a little bit dicey. Now coming back out onto the map, Dragon is alive. LDLC, they get to push in across the board, potentially take that objective for themselves as well.
One of the things we were saying in the green room behind this was if LDLCOL can get the snowball rolling, begin to start their engines, they are one of those teams that snowball so aggressively, so hard, largely so decisively, and they have certainly managed to do that now for that Baron take. Dragon number 3 would be up. They've got Baron to work with for a little while yet. It feels like Wildcats are kind of without too many options to stop this shove with this front line, with the saplings warding off the flank, with this Jinx now at 2.5 items. So difficult to break the siege.
Cleanse is up for Bao though, so he can play a little bit more aggressively. He can cleanse the postal takeover. Now it is a question of Kofte hitting level 16. 3 points onto that ultimate is going to be huge. Having the 2 items, the fully stacked Rod of Ages as well. Can he find the Jinx? Can he find the Syndra? Can he find the squishy member and 100% to zero them real quick?
And importantly, can you find those members through Kryze Sion? Because we're talking about how Bao, he's hit his 2 items, great stuff, has the cleanse. He doesn't have a Lord Dominus regards. He is not cutting through this Sion fast. You need to bring the carries to you somehow, some way. LDLC, as it stands, they've had a pretty uncontested run on the map after that Baron has been taken. They pushed in mid, they pushed in bot, took that Dragon as well. Gonna go back for those resets, get even more items, and Wildcats are still asked the same question. How the heck do you reach these carries through the front line?
And since you mentioned Sion, observers, could we please see how much HP this Sion holds on himself right now?
Oh, that's a pretty amount of HP there.
Nearly at 5k, just shy, and that's over 1,000 stacks on the heart steal as well. Yeah, he definitely is. Between Soul Furnace and everything else, this Sion is becoming a very beatable boy. I also wanted to point out that there are 3 items for both Backlund and Jeskla as well, which is a very significant amount of damage to deal with. Syndra can do the tank killing, while Jinx just does the raw crit damage across multiple people with that Hurricane and Infinity Edge online. You're still waiting on a 3rd item on Kofte. You're still waiting on a completion of that LDL for the Aphelios, and it feels like if they can get those online, maybe for the next Baron, maybe for that next Dragon, they've got an angle, but if they don't, you feel really scared about this game state. It's already rough.
I just feel like vision setup is going to be huge for Wildcats here, but how do you get vision setup? How do you walk behind enemy lines when there is so many spells to keep you at bay if you are Wildcats? I feel like a Gragas cast, a Wukong Cyclone is the things that I'm looking at to try and get onto the Jinx, try to get onto the Syndra, but it's impossible because you've been choked out of vision the entire time.
Kryze does not care for your AD carry. He demolishes that tower, becoming a bit of a demolitionist himself.
It's the wrecking ball. He's just decided he's, taking after Miley Cyrus, coming in, singing that tune.
Okay, we're even going to the point where Destroyer's saying, like, yeah, I need to ult this wave up towards the top because, I mean, LDLC, they have complete control of the Orcs Court of this game. They are choosing the tune of how this goes, and that is currently the tune of Jeskla running forward with the Excited.
Throw down the Maokai ultimate there to buy some space and do what is often done. Zone people off towers as the siege is coming on through. But on cooldown for a little bit, but at this point of the game, doesn't need that long a cooldown, so we'll be up more than in time for the next objective fight.
Yeah, and again, it keeps coming back to the same point, right, where LDLC, they've just played very calm, very collected. They've played around their vision. They've played around keeping their backline safe. We've even got... I absolutely love this so much. We have a well-read individual in the mid lane. I am obligated to mention... I am obligated to mention the Magi Soul Stealer. It's not ego. It can
why I rolled my eyes?
Why did you roll your eyes?
I had 21 kills, and I'm like, freaking, I'm gonna buy a Magi's. I buy the freaking Magi's, I die instantly.
Well, okay, so the logic with something like this is actually you want to buy it before a big fight, so then you get to play... Because then you have to...
But then I went 1v5. That
what
was
you
a
want
big
to do is, well, that's the thing. If you then win the big fight, you get the stacks after that point. Now, you sat here on really low about, if there are multiple fights left in this game, and Backlund, let's be honest, he's been safe for most of this game, you're going to get value out of this. Just again, Wildcats have been asked this question the whole game. How do you reach the Syndra and the Jinx? If the answer is no, there's huge value to this.
Also, I'm just going to say, usually between both of these teams, their average game time is 33 minutes. I don't think there's much left to this game if we go by the numbers so far. For the Magi's to come in at this point, unless LDLC are playing extremely respectfully here, thinking that a comeback is very much doable. There's not much goal difference.
Go! They found an angle to Jeskla. Isabella going to be around, but Jeskla gets the flash on now. Trying to turn it around. Kofte goes golden, throws the cask out to buy some time, but I think it might just be a last gasp. They do kill Zoelys, but the execute comes back on through as Syndra presses the outplay button. Kryze, though, in the front line, not as tanky as he would like. Not shown down just yet. Elramir's clone is the next target. It's a 1-for-1 in the end. Support for mid lane.
Oh, that was the only fight that they caught the Jinx with both the Gragas and the Wukong, the thing we were looking for. But Bao was too busy being stopped by a huge Sion in the backline. Threw the ulti onto the Sion. Multiple auto attacks. Kryze just laughed and walked away. This Sion is becoming extremely problematic. You mentioned it. If that Sion is in your front line, how do you kill the backline?
Well, most of it has to come through plays like this. This is the correct play to go towards. You find that hole in the vision line. LDLC make a rare slip in this game where vision line is not covering the rest of their team, but the flashes are still there at this point. You've not had fights before this to blow the summoners onto the key carries. I think Wildcats are lucky to get away with a fight with a kill there.
Go. Remember, Jeskla, no flash, so that burn is monstrous. Baron's up, and that means your AD carry on the side of LDLC has to back away, has to think about resetting cast. Wrong side of White, who flashes to go to safety.
But this is as Baron is up. Dragon's up in 20 seconds. Wildcats, they have a moment where they know the AD carry must reset. They have to go back to base. Backlund at least has teleport. LDLC, what's your answer?
Destroy at level 17. That ult's not on a long cooldown at 2, already half off. The burn through it is a flip. Can you smell the burgers, everyone? Ice rockets! Isn't quite enough. Destroy taken low, but not down. White with the flash down, and no Blacko could not get into the pit. And Wildcats get back.
See, had that not been the nerfed Jinx rocket, that was 100% a steal right there from Jeskla. But I feel like this is pretty creative from the side of Wildcats. They're trying to find these openings while LDLC have to reset to take something off the map. Meanwhile, they've lost Soul, they've lost their bottom inhibitor, and let me tell you what, Baron is temporary, Soul is forever.
And that's what you're giving up for it. Now, the extra move speed onto the Jinx and the Syndra, even though you're not likely to get the point where you're ulting before the threat comes in, so you've got like the massive move speed as someone is looking to engage onto you, the move speed still matters an awful lot here, particularly because Wildcats are really struggling, can't say this enough, to get onto that Jinx and that Syndra. Extra Soul in place also unlocks that Elder in the next few minutes as well. Wildcats, maybe they actually take that risk and say, you know what, better take that Baron, get some gold on the table. Bow!
Onslaught comes on through, the equalizer to clear out the wave. Kryze, though, has burned through a certain amount, with enough items now in for some of these carries from Wildcats and shy on damage themselves.
I was about to say there are a few minutes before Jeskla has his flash back up and available, so if he does get caught up by a flaming carpet into a casket, there is that chance. But so far, yeah, he's fine. He's sitting on 0 deaths, has not been caught out, has lost his flash multiple times. His positioning and the way the team, and specifically Kryze, plays around keeping his backline safe has been flawless so far.
Jeskla, as we've said, very difficult to hold on to the stopwatch. Ghost Flash will be up in the next couple minutes. There's a redemption in Zoelys inventory. There's the bailout they can pull out. There's the Maokai, the Sion you've got to deal with as well. And even once you got rid of them, Syndra is still a threat. It is so challenging. Of course, the damage from Wildcats between a Wukong, a Rumble, a Gragas, a level 16, 3.5 item Aphelios is not shabby. Don't get me wrong. It's just as we said, the target access is a challenge.
Yeah, the thing is though, there are some questions now because actually the gold at 35 minutes, 34 even, is not that far apart. Kryze, if he does get a little bit too far away from his Jinx and the Jinx is not starting to play, he can get taken down if Bow's in the right place.
Elramir on a flank here, they're trying to get to Kofte, don't quite make it happen. Some damage coming back on through, it's a 5v4 at the minute. Remember, Destroy No Teleport is on the other side of the map.
As well.
Oh, there's Backlund's about to face check it. It's getting very scary, but
I would say it's very scary for the Wukong.
Yeah, that monkey was not enjoying that.
He's 3 levels down at this point, and LDLC are just about now starting to pull the trigger. And again, this is something that we've seen over and over from LDLC. They're not necessarily, even when they're winning, very willing to pull that trigger onto an engage, and they have the tools, the hostile takeover, the Maokai, but in this particular case, they don't have to, because for Wildcats to win the game, they have to throw their bodies at LDLC. And this particular draft on the side of the French team is specifically built to counter that.
And I think we often talk about win conditions in League of Legends. I'd like to flip that question around slightly in terms of perspective. And what are loss conditions? What can you do which might lose you the game? Because what LDLC could do is run at the enemy team, look for the sign into the big engage, and go over your vision line. And maybe give something like we saw there a chance for Elramir to get into the backline. LDLC have actually been pretty good at just playing towards their comp and saying, look, I'm not going to walk away from my vision too easily. We're already winning this game. They're not leaving those openings for Wildcats to exploit too easily.
Yeah, there's one scary thing.
One?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's been 200 years of collective experience.
Yeah. 103. He's been out a little bit longer
on a particular champion, true. On a particular champion on the side of Wildcats. Bao is piloting him at the moment. And this champion does tend to get scary. 2 items, 3 items don't scratch the Sion. Maybe 5 items, though, scratch the Sion. So if LDLC do not make the move until Elder, this Aphelios is sitting right now on 4 items and could potentially be the game breaker.
Teleport into the inhibitor tower. Kofte comes back forward, but that mid lane tier 2 does fall. 2 minutes till Baron, just over 2 minutes till Elder. And it does feel like we have ourselves a mighty Uber fight coming on up.
There's a storm coming, folks, and I love this. The champions of the TCL and the LFL face off for the first time, and it goes late game with two teams that love to late game team fight. Hell, Bao walked out of the group stage against Heretics, getting a pentakill. Jeskla, after his first round robin, had like 1,000 DPM. These teams are no strangers to late game team fights, and we're set up for that again.
Wildcats, 2 MSI appearances, 1 Worlds appearances. LDLC, 1
we're on story
back
time,
in
are we now?
2020 before it renamed to EMEA Mass. Of course it's story time. It's time to set up some stakes, my boy. Because this is a very critical fight coming on up. They are the 3-peat LFL champions who've turned up to this tournament and failed to win it despite the dominance of their region so many times.
I feel like Wildcats lost the window right here where LDLC were resetting to try and set some deep vision in the backline. But I guess it doesn't matter. Kofte does not have his teleport available.
Taken so low, the equalizer comes on over, executed by the unleashed power, and now Kofte in the middle of nowhere. There is no amount of drinking you can do to numb this pain. Knocked on up, knocked on down, a wild growth is just more wood to be cut down. Lumberjack Sion living up to his name, a hook onto Bao with that handshake. See, I told you it works like that. Shut down to a Zoelys, 3 dead. The mid jungle support we were praising for this team falls down, and LDLC can look to break the base.
And before the late game team fight can ever get onto the table for the Wildcats, the candle is snuffed out. LDLC find the picks.
Parus and Destroy have got to do the impossible here and somehow, some way hold on to their base. No equalizer, no wild growth. 5v2, it is desperation. Zoelys taken low, but he is hardly the biggest of your threats. Look at Backlund, look at Jeskla. It's just game 1 to LDLC. Oh well, they do it in style.
Slow and steady wins you the race. They did not allow the demons against Unicorns of Love to get to them in this particular game. It was very similar. Wildcats hit their mid lane tower, which is what caused them to repeatedly lose games for the set of LDLC, but they slowed down. They knew they had a better draft here, they knew they had the better front to back, they knew they had the distance to play with, and Wildcats, they just could not find these flanks.
And what can you say? It's like a story written out in the Odyssey.
Go back to the
Parus and Hector sat alone at their base, and the TCL's walls of Troy fall to the siege of the LFL champions.
That was very deep. I wasn't expecting
it's
that.
Great.
I
love
will
it.
come up with some Aeneid references to follow up at some point. But hey,
it.
that's fine. Georgia, take it away before we go down a really deep rabbit hole.
Yeah, I just feel like Wildcats need to go back to the drawing board and start drafting things that made them win in the first place. Parus, get him roaming around the map. LDLC are susceptible to falling to mid-jungle support synergy, and Wildcats have a fantastic trio for that. Get them into work.
You heard it from Georgia, but it's time to see what the analyst desk thinks about that game, so we'll throw it to them now. Ginny, take it away.
Thank you, Sam. We're going to be taking it away indeed, and it's actually funny that you guys are bringing up the draft and how you want to see Wildcats play, because that's what we're going to be starting with, considering what they locked in and how we saw their plan of action come to life. It might not have been what we expected when we seen the draft.
Yeah, I mean, this game was almost
Don't be too happy about it.
It was kind of expected, actually. I feel like from the picks that you saw that it wasn't like you thought, oh my god, what is happening out of here? It seemed like they still had intent with what they went with in the draft, but maybe some things could have been changed a bit. I know you were talking in the background about potentially swapping that Rumble into the mid lane instead, but obviously there's champion pool issues as well, so you don't really know if it can be.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things, right, where it's a bit of a double-edged sword. You can definitely be attacked a little bit more if you send Rumble into the mid lane. In this particular instance, I think it's fine in the top side. For me, I think Wildcats had a composition where they wanted to actually be proactive, especially around the top side, but being able to move those pieces around, attack the mid lane, I think. George brought up a really good point about how, LDLC can be very susceptible to mid lane pressure, but it felt like maybe just because of the support pick, they felt a lot less confident to actually use some of the skirmishing aspects of their composition, especially in the early game. Because, to me, Rumble, Gragas, as a 2v2 in the early game, it's very, very difficult as Maokai Syndra to really step up to that much burst.
Yes, I think in the beginning when we just saw what was drafted, a lot of the jungle pool was trimmed out, but it still felt like both teams got what they wanted. It seemed like Wildcats really wanted to play towards that Wukong in the early game, and like with the slow pacing that the game had, it should have been alright, specifically with him getting a kill in the early game and getting a hit with the Divine Syndra. But it felt like they really struggled to play the map with the composition that they have. They have this like non-committal engage that we saw worked at times, but never really quite often. I think some of it also came back to the fact that Destroy went with the Ignite instead of teleports, and when we came to some of the later team fights, he was barely ever at the right place at the right time, and it was hard for them to actually play that.
I actually think the key word they used there is often, because they just didn't really send it too much in the early game. And I feel like with the kind of composition where you have Gragas, you have Rumble, you have Wukong, I think actually timing summoner spells and blowing them off cooldown is a really, really big thing in the early game to actually open up your ability to skirmish freely at neutral objectives, basically just skirmish on demand. If you just want kills, you want a tower, it doesn't really matter, jungle camps, just being able to actually throw those ults out and go, okay, well, now Jinx doesn't have flash, now Syndra doesn't have flash, those targets becoming very vulnerable when realistically, LDLC don't really have many tools for peel in the early game. Sure, there's, you know, CC there once level 6 is coming, etc. But it's not like you've got a Tom Kench there. It's not like you've got, you know, a ridiculous enchanter with a bunch of items like Super in the late game. It's kind of just Renata with an ultimate, and then you're hoping that Maokai and Sion can be a frontline. So I feel like, to me, for Wildcats, just more proactivity. I like the idea of this composition. I think for LDLC, they just saw Wildcats not do much and just kind of ran with it.
Yeah, looking at the bot lane as well, that was one of the lanes that we highlighted in terms of where we were expecting to be seeing the most action from the side of Wildcats. But it was actually LDLC that was continuously looking to get that pressure down on the bot lane. I mean, you give up the Herald, but you get that pick. You've shut down Bao, which has been such an instrumental player for the side of Wildcats. So in that regards, when we're looking at the draft here, we see the Lulu and the Aphelios. I mean, I'm happy it's not a Zeri.
Yeah, for sure. But I also think, like, just in general, like, outside of the draft and how the game was actually running in the first 15 minutes of the game, this was a really slow burner of a game. And I think a lot of it actually came down to, well, from the side of Wildcats, they struggled to make plays because, well, the mid laner was always pushed on the tower. And from the side of LDLC, I actually think that Backlund could have spent more time actually impacting his bot lane as well. We never saw 4-man dive really come through, but there was the potential for it because mid lane was pretty much always pushed in. There was the possibility of roam down bot. And even then, when he was pushing forward, he did it without vision. So one of the first kills that went over to the Wukong was actually Backlund being pushed too far forward. So that really put a spanner in the works as well. They couldn't really get a nice snowball or clean gameplay like they probably wanted in the early game.
Yeah, speaking of clean gameplay, let's have a look at the Drake fight specifically. I think this is one of the big turning points for the game where we expected something that didn't come to life.
Yeah, it just felt like a couple of the ultimates just falling a little bit short here for the Wildcats. Kryze is kind of off to the side. He's not really being a body for Jeskla, for Backlund to step up, but I think this here, a little bit of anti-synergy, the cask with the equalizer at the same time, and it's one of the things that you're always going to run into this kind of issue, and it's kind of fixable. It's just comms, right? You say, I'm going to throw this out first, and you sort it before the fights actually break out.
Yeah, and I think it's that engage we were talking about, right? The equalizer could have come down first, then the cast from there lower for you to pick up a couple kills, but it's just the team fight and the execution that goes wrong. And I think it also speaks to how important it is being first on that objective, because when you get to set up for it, it becomes way easier for you to play. And even though a lot of execution was kind of missing on both sides, you can see how easy it actually was to execute LDLC's composition, the Chumbers to play around, the Renata as well, the space that the ultimates were buying, the fact that they had an actual frontliner made their composition so much easier to play. So it's not the fact that the composition with a Rumble and the Gragas could not work, it was just when we actually saw them try and make it work, it seemed a bit too difficult for them to actually get the ultimates down and their execution down in proper manner.
Yeah, and it felt like that was something that LDLC was very good at capitalizing off of. We've seen it in multiple team fights where they kind of get that feeling from, okay, the equalizer is maybe not working the way they want it to work. There is no teleport available either for the side of Wildcats, and then we get the Baron play.
Yeah, I think the Baron play just... It felt to me as if Wildcats just didn't really have much an idea of how they wanted to play around the fact they don't have teleport too much. Just consistently kind of being caught out on Parus as well. This is the second time in a row actually where he found himself dead.
So they got the flash earlier than this, and it's just better setup from LDLC. Once again, we talk about team fight composition. They know that the Wukong can pretty much steal it. So they just come off. They know they're split. Once again, Destroy late to the play because he does not have that teleport. So much easier for LDLC again and again, and you can see it. They're moving around as a unit, while on the side of Wildcats, it's a lot of the individual play. And even when they do come forward and get some of the kills, it's always by the cost of your members dying after. So they could never really get a beneficial trade. And after this team fight, fight, well, the game should just be realistically over. You can see it. It got a bit close again. You can see that gold graph takes a dip. Wasn't as clean as they probably would have liked it on LDLC, but still, getting that Baron, getting the soul afterwards, should just let them win the game, and it did in the end.
Yeah, that's like my hopes and dreams going up, and then they just
And like a
get
heartbeat
shattered.
monitor as well, potentially.
Oh, whoa, if your heartbeat monitor looks like that,
Yeah,
I'm
you may.
worried about you.
Yeah, I would worry as
That's
well.
all I'm gonna say.
I just feel like to me, LDLC just had a more clear idea of how they can win this game, right? I think, yeah, sure, we can pick on the fact that, you know, maybe they weren't as proactive towards the bottom side and actually getting Jeskla ahead, and it felt like that kind of just unfolded through White's repeated visits down there as opposed to a more, you know, team-based setup where you've got 4 members instead. I feel like for Wildcats, it's basically the opposite. It felt like they weren't necessarily always on the same page. When you've got this kind of composition where it's just non-committal engages for the most part, just sending your ultimates off cooldown so you know that you're working with flashless, very immobile carries is how you win that game, and it felt like they never really abused that fact as much as perhaps they should have.
Yeah, maybe it was just a warm-up game, you know?
Well, could
Happens
be.
to us.
Stage nerfs,
Yeah,
whatever you want to call
we'll
it.
see.
Quarterfinals,
Anyway.
first best of 3. They can bounce back, you know.
That's it. We'll see. Anyway, LDLC, they take the game 1 with slow and steady pace. We're going to be throwing it to a short break. We're going to be back after that, and we're going to dissect game 2 and what we should or can be expecting.